Welcome back to the YouTube channel and happy Saturday. It is great to see you guys back here today. So we have been talking recently about King David, and the last time that we talked, and we just talked on Wednesday about this, we had some issues with King David to where he slept with somebody's wife that was not his own. He had the guy murdered, and basically Nathan the prophet came to King David and called him out on it and said, listen, you messed up on this and God isn't happy. And we had talked about what the difference was between King Saul and King David. Because when King Saul was confronted with his sin that happened, he was very quick to make sure that everybody was blamed except him. He was like, oh, well, you know, all these other people, they didn't do their jobs, so I had to fill in for them. And he tried to basically not take any credit for the things that he had done. Whereas when Nathan came to David and talked to David, David was very quick to realize that he had sinned against God and to ask for forgiveness from God for this. And it was that specific thing that actually kept David as king and kept him on the throne, because that's where God wanted him to be. And it was because he just merely owned up to his sin. And so we had talked about why we should own up to our own sins when we're confronted with them too.
Yeah, but now this doesn't mean that that David was really off the hook about everything that happened. Really, there was these consequences that now was going to play throughout the life of David, his family, and the kingdom. So now the story that we go into is about what happened to really what was David's what is his son and a daughter of David. And what happened was that Amnon, he developed what was this lust for one of his own sisters. This is Amnon, one of the sons of David. But he didn't know how to approach the situation. And so he talked with a friend of his, and his friend says, oh, just convince Tamar, sister, to really come into his bedroom and serve him food. Act like you're sick. That's what he says. Act like you're sick and have Tamar bring food for you. So, okay, Amnon acts sick. And then when Tamar says, oh, you know, the only person that really will help me feel better at the time would be Tamar. So have her bring food to me. And so when she brought the food, Amnon said, oh, everybody else just leave the room right now. Tamar's really going to help me, you know, at this moment. But when everybody else left the room, Amnon actually grabbed her and forced her to go in bed with him, which is a complete sin in the eyes of God and even of the whole people. And so it was horrible. This really what this was, rape against his own sister in front of like the kingdom at the moment. But what happens is that Amnon wasn't really satisfied with that. He thought that that's what he needed. But this lust, this evil that can really be brought upon a person doesn't necessarily bring joy or happiness into you. It's the opposite. So what Amnon does is that pushes her away and kicks her out. And so Tamar is just devastated. She is completely, utterly destroyed because of what happened to her. And then the word got to David about what happened, and David was like, that's horrible. But David really kept it all a secret. He was like, didn't really even address the whole situation. So Absalom, who is the brother of Tamar, takes Tamar and says, you know what, just stay inside of my mansion for the moment. Let's not make a whole big deal in front of everybody, even though, you've just been destroyed by Amnon, and hides her away. So really, David did a terrible sin, a sin that was born of lust. And this ended up reflecting upon his own family with Amnon, who does really is a sin also of lust and something completely terrible that now has created a a breaking in the family of David, where now we have Absalom, who was the closest brother to Tamar, being like completely angered, but keeping that anger to himself. And we have Amnon, who's currently seems to be off the hook about his own lustful sin. But now we have the family of David falling apart.
And so that's not the end of that story there, because Absalom, we'll hear more about him later, but he goes on to do some very radical and very different things. And it's really hard because David didn't do anything. It was his job to, both as the father of all three of them, but also as the king. And he sat by and chose to let all this happen even after he had heard about it. And so this plays into what Absalom chooses to do, which we'll talk about next week. And Absalom chooses some very drastic things that maybe David could have prevented. But it just goes to show that when you have things like lust and anger in your life, it can control you. It can take over your life if you let it. But really, we need to make sure that we are not letting it control us, because it's not going to make us happy no matter what. Only God can do that. And so we need to make sure that we are checking our hearts and making sure that God has rule and reign in our hearts, and not these things like lust and anger and things like that. And so Absalom does not turn his heart over to God, and it has some devastating consequences on David's family, which will be fun to talk about next week. And so we'll see you then.
See you.